Hi everyone, this week I wanted to cover a topic that we've actually gone over in the past a little bit before, but I think it's important that we look at it in a little bit more detail, and it's the subject of how do you negotiate things like a promotion or a pay rise, things which are very personal and can leave us feeling quite vulnerable. And I know that we've talked about it a little bit before, but I want to go into a bit more detail about how do you actually go about it. And how do you kind of overcome both some of the psychological things which stop you doing it or stop you doing it well, but also acknowledging some of the structural issues that are there which might make it really hard for you to get the thing that you want. So I'm actually a trained lawyer and I've worked as a lawyer for best part of 20 years. So I'm really highly trained in negotiation. So I'm used to negotiating contracts and deals with people, and I think I'm quite a good negotiator in that context. And yet, when it comes to my own stuff, when it comes to something that's like personal for me, whether it's something that we're negotiating for Lifetise, the business, or whether it's just actually for me, I find it really hard. I find it really, really hard, and it's like all of my training goes completely out the window, and I think I feel really worried about what the outcome will be and what that means for me and about me, and I think it like really holds me back. So I wanted first to say that even those of us who are trained to do negotiation and to do it at quite a high level, there's something about when you're doing it for yourself that makes it feel way worse. So I've had to overcome quite a lot of the stuff that I hear some of you telling us about, you know, the anxiety around going into negotiations, wondering about, is it the right time? Do I have the right kind of ammunition for this negotiation? Like, how do I put my case across in a way that makes it more likely that I'm going to get what I want? And I think the easiest context for us to look at this in is probably that promotion / pay rise thing. So I think the first thing for us to acknowledge is, if you are a woman or someone who identifies as a woman, that there are serious structural issues that may get in the way of you getting your promotion or your pay rise, right? I've seen various studies, and I've written about it in a blog post, which I'll put in the comments here, that show that it's not at all true that women don't ask for pay rises or promotions, but it is really, really true that they don't get them as often as men. So there is some structural bias built into the systems and the workplaces that most of us operate in, which makes it harder for us to get those promotions and those pay rises. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, but it does mean that we should give ourselves a break if we don't get exactly what we want when we want. And it does mean that it's probably harder individually than it would be if we were men. And I think it's important for us to take that on board so that we're not feeling like it's any individual or personal failing to do these things, that sometimes it's just that the crap is baked in that we're trying to overcome. So what can we actually do? Right. So there are a few kind of truths about this. One is that if you are starting a new job, it is way, way, way easier to negotiate that title and your salary than it is once you're embedded in a company, right? There's something about being in a company, even if you're a superstar, even if you're like bringing home loads of money for them, even if you're doing everything right, they're just much tighter with budget once you're in, right? They don't seem to worry as much about whether you're going to leave, but when you are a new hire, they're far more receptive to those kind of conversations. So I would say to everybody who is moving jobs, if it is within your power, right? And I'm very well aware that there are certain jobs like public sector where you're graded and you don't really have the ability to negotiate your rates. And I get that, right? So this isn't for you. But for everybody else where there is like a salary range, or you believe that they're paying under market rate, or you just think you should be getting more, then please, 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 if you're taking a new job, do try to negotiate that salary at the point that you are joining, right? Have a go at it. It doesn't matter, right? What have you got to lose? The worst case scenario is that they're basically going to say, sorry, we can't stretch that much, right? Okay. They're very unlikely to tell you to go and take a running jump and then give the job to somebody else, right? So that is the one thing that I learned. I moved around jobs every kind of like 2 to 3 years, and that is how I built up the skill of being able to ask for money, because I did it on the way in and that felt much easier. Okay, what about if you're actually already in a job and you've been kind of either passed over for promotion, or you don't feel that you're getting pay rises at the frequency that you should be, or you feel like you're kind of falling behind compared to like market rate for you? What do? Well, that is a genuine negotiation at that point, right? That is you going in and pitching your value to the company. And so you need to be armed. You need to be talking to recruiters to work out what other opportunities there might be for you, either so that you get a sense of like how competitive the market is, and then that way you can kind of go in with confidence thinking, well, they don't really want to have to replace me because it's a really competitive market and they're going to end up paying more. So you've kind of got that in your arsenal. And you want to kind of benchmark salaries. So you want to like look on Indeed or any of the other sites and find out like what are average salaries, like what is the salary range for the position that I'm doing, so that you can go in and you've got those numbers and you can be saying to your organization, hang on a second, you are underpaying me. Here's what it should be. And bear in mind, for most organizations, right, if they have to replace you, they're going to be paying your salary, but possibly more for anyone who's negotiating higher on the way in. Plus, in a lot of cases, they're going to have to be paying out recruitment fees. And if recruitment fees are somewhere between 15% and 25% on top of salary, that's an awful lot of money that they're going to have to spend to replace you, and they could just give you that pay rise. So that's often a good way of doing it, right? You say to somebody, okay, I'm looking for a 5% pay rise or a 10% pay rise, and they're like, horror. And then you walk them through, yeah, but here's what the market rate is, and we appear to have fallen behind. And then you say, and then they're like, oh, okay, I'm not sure if I can stretch to that. And then you point out, look, I actually need this money because I want to do whatever it is, right? I want to buy a house, or I've got a young family, or I'm thinking of starting, whatever your reasons are. Feel free to bring in those reasons or not, your choice. But you're saying to them, here's what I think it's worth, market rate. Here is the value that I've brought to the organization. That means that I should be paid this rate. And unfortunately, if you're not going to be able to pay me, then I'm really going to have no choice but to look elsewhere. You don't have to say that, but you definitely want to imply it. And then you just kind of want to, again, implicitly explain that it's reasonable for them to give you that pay rise because the alternative of them having to recruit to replace you is going to be a lot more expensive. Now, that's quite a lot to do when you're feeling like under pressure and you're like, what are they going to say? Are they just going to completely dismiss it? Are they just going to make my life a misery for the next 3 weeks? How is it going to go down? And actually, I read a brilliant book that I think could be really helpful for people who are perhaps less confident negotiating, because it gives you like really practical ways of managing the actual conversation. So it really walks you through how to phrase questions, how to phrase statements, and it's by a guy who is like a former FBI hostage negotiator. So he's used to negotiating in genuine like life and death situations. And it's got some really clever stuff in here about the types of questions that you put to people so that you're almost making it their problem to solve and getting them on side. And it does a lot of the stuff I love, which is around kind of behavioral psychology. And I'd really recommend it. So it's called Never Split the Difference. I think that's probably back to front for you. I'll put the notes in the video. It's by a guy called Chris Voss. You'll be able to kind of find it because it's a bright yellow cover. And one of the things I think that is important to do is you're benchmarking what you think you should be paid, right? And so you've got that number in mind. Now, human psychology says that whoever kind of goes in with the first offer, that creates what's known as an anchor for the rest of the conversation. So all of a sudden, whoever goes in with a number, that number becomes the thing that is negotiated either higher or lower, but it becomes like they call it the anchor because it's the thing that kind of grounds the whole conversation. So when you're thinking about salary ask, you might want to go in with a slightly higher offer than you'd be prepared to accept, even if that makes you feel a bit nervous to say it out loud. There's a brilliant woman called Cindy Gallop who is ex-advertising, and she always says that when you go into like pay review negotiations, you need to get used to saying a number that makes you kind of like, you've got to get used to it. It's got to be a high enough number that it almost makes you laugh out loud, and then you've got somewhere to come down from. So the reason I say this is, so if you're going into a job, you're currently paid what, 30,000, and you've kind of worked out that a reasonable rate for your level should be at sort of 35 to 37. Now, for your boss, that might seem like quite a big jump up, but I would recommend you thinking about going in and asking for, say, 40 to 42. That's your anchor point. That means that you've got a lot of room to come down without actually like losing anything. Plus, if you come down even kind of, you can come down even below your 35 if you're willing, and then the other side feels like they've got a really good deal. So what you kind of want to avoid is going in with the lowest amount that you'd be prepared to accept, right? So in this case, you don't go in and say, all right, I'd really like to get 35, because your boss is unlikely to negotiate upwards for you. So you want to go in at the higher rate, that kind of sets the tone of the conversation, and then you can negotiate down around that. I think it's really important, like if you are having these types of negotiations and you're nervous about it, then try it out with friends, with your partner beforehand, just so you're not hesitant in the way that you present it. So much of life, and it shouldn't be this way, but it is, so much of life comes down to, can you present it well, right? How is it coming across? Do you seem like you've got the courage of your convictions? Are you being persuasive? So if you're struggling with some of those things, then either get some coaching around it. There's plenty of people who would be able to kind of coach you for a relatively small fee, or try it out with your friends, with your partner, anyone that you're not going to be embarrassed in front of. Although actually maybe try it with them, because then you'll get over that embarrassment, and that will help as well. But yeah, you kind of want to make sure that when you go into that meeting, you've got like your game face on and you're not feeling too vulnerable. You're going to still have like a ton of adrenaline and cortisol and all of that kind of fight or flight stuff going on inside you, but you want to minimize that as much as possible. You want to do like a load of deep breathing before you go in. You want to do some of like Amy Cuddy's power poses, which is like where you stand and you've got your arms in the air. Anything that basically kind of frames you and psychs you up for the fact that you can have this conversation and you can go in feeling confident, being able to kind of present your case. And then the secret really is that you present your case, you say, look, I'll let you think about that. And then whatever they come back with doesn't need to be the end of the conversation. I think that's another thing that this book is really good about. It basically says like, no is the answer that you sometimes want, because no then is the beginning of the negotiation, it's not the end. No helps you understand what the objections might be. So in the situation we're talking about, the objections might be the company's just not making enough money, or there's just no budget this year, or perhaps they feel like you haven't hit your targets. Whatever the particular combo of objections might be, if you know what they are, then you can deal with them or overcome them or tweak what you're asking for. So for some people I've seen, and I've done it as well, right? I've had occasions where I've asked for a pay rise and they've said, look, we just don't have budget. And I've said, okay, so what else can you do for me, right? And there's alternatives. Sometimes it might be that you want some additional days holiday, or you might want to negotiate a shorter working week, or maybe it's, could they give you an additional couple of percent into your pension, right? There are creative ways of getting something, even if it's not that salary uplift. Maybe they can't afford to pay you the full salary, but they'd be willing to give you a bonus, right? It's not a yes, it's not always just a yes or no conversation. Sometimes it's a maybe conversation, and then you have to get a little bit more creative about, okay, so what does that mean for me? The final piece I would say is, if you're really gunning for a pay rise because you feel that you're kind of below market rate, but the company you're in won't give you that, and you're thinking about leaving, one thing you might want to think about is going into that pay rise conversation, knowing that they're unlikely to give you a pay rise, but asking them if they can give you a change in title instead without the pay rise. And the reason for that is that if they're not going to be able to give you a pay rise and you feel like you're falling behind, then chances are you're probably going to want to move to a different company. And if you can move with a higher title, then that automatically helps you get over the hurdle of asking for the higher salary in the next place. So if a salary lift is out of the question, then maybe think about, okay, could they possibly give me a different title that's going to make it easier for me to change jobs in, say, 6 months' time? I hope that was helpful. As always, please ask any questions that you have. Happy to respond. We'll always respond to everybody who asks us questions. You can do it anonymously if you just want to send us a message. But we hope that this really helps, and we hope to hear like success stories of people who've gone in and done incredible negotiations, and maybe you can teach us the next time. Thanks. See you soon.